Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the old world because I've been thinking. We've got the roadmap and the roadmap is now complete. There is no new roadmap, but I do imagine that the Specialist Design Studio is busy right now with Horus Heresy, which has just recently had its next edition. But where does it leave us? Where do we go from here? The question is, what can they do after the release of a brand new army? Grand Cathay has released a small while ago. It's an absolutely gorgeous army, very limited, let's be very honest there, very limited. And it's still requiring its named character. Who knows when that's going to happen? But what's next after that? What do they have in store or possibly have in store for the old world? Well, we already have confirmation that we're getting two new Arcane Journals, the War of Cetrus Fury and the Dawn of the Storm Dragon. One of them for the Tomb Kings, which interestingly enough doesn't mention any new loadouts for the Tomb Kings. However, it does say that various armies of infamy like the Dwarven Slayers and the Border Princes are going to be coming out. Now, we haven't seen what's in there just yet, but an educated guess would say that's more of a campaign book than it is a Arcane Journal for the Tomb Kings. Same thing for the Dawn of the Storm Dragon, where it looks like there's no new units, but it's just kind of focused around just an army of infamy that's mixed between Grand Cathay and Marienburg for some reason. So it looks like these are just kind of like story-focused books more than anything else, which is nice. You know, it follows that whole format of, well, probably a stripped-down version of the Storm of Chaos in a sense. Narrative-focused Arcane Journals have always been kind of expected, so it's good to see this happening. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see more of these narrative-focused ones with maybe no new units, just to kind of round off everything for the first edition. That is, of course, if the old world is in that weird 3-year cycle, which, to be honest, should now be pumped up to 4 years because, well, you know, it's now 4 main settings. They might as well do that. It's better for everyone. It means less rushed out work. If you've been playing 40k recently, you'll know exactly what I mean. That being said, I do expect possibly secondary or even tertiary Arcane Journals for everyone fully, and I mean with some new units, new characters, and so on, because as the story expands, it demands a little bit more work. If you look towards the Empire, for example, right now we have Null and the Knightly Orders, but I think a lot of people are looking towards the churches now. You know, there are 3 major churches with Tal, Ulrich and Sigmar, also technically Manan with the whole thing in Marienburg, but they're like a minor faction when it comes to this. The Warriors of Chaos could start to see the introduction of mono-god rosters. So just a list focused around Chaos Warriors of Khorne, for example, the character. We already know that Arbal the Undefeated is very important during the Siege of Prague, so they could start gearing that up, or they could wait a while, maybe going with some other characters. We know that Fridal, the new character for the Warriors of Chaos, she's like a lieutenant of the lieutenant, which is just kind of odd, but maybe that means that we can start seeing the bigger name characters start to make their way through, possibly with some newer models. If Arbal does get a return, it would be nice to see him look more like he does in Total War Warhammer than his old miniature, which did not really age that well. Now, it's possible that things just might slow down in terms of books in favor of some just updated minis. We also know right now that Lich Priests, Royal Heralds, and Princes are getting a model update where you'll be able to get one on foot and one on horse. This is with some new rules too, because they're finally going to get barding, it seems, and that is absolutely awesome. Now, this is something that I could see happening with a bit of a slowdown, so less books, just a few narrative books here and there, like what we've been seeing now with the War of Cetrus Fury, but with a focus on getting some updated models out there. A lot of factions right now are currently missing a possible battle standard bearer. So this kit is very similar to that of the kit that we've seen for Grand Cathay, or hell, the very old kit that, well, it's not really that old, for the Empire, which is you get a character on foot and a character mounted, and this can be your battle standard bearer, it can also be something else. But a lot of races right now are missing either generic battle standard bearers, or they've got an old version in resin. The Beastmen are missing one altogether. They had a made to order, but that's obviously not sustainable. The Wood Elves also. So it's about time that we start seeing these getting updated and refreshed. It could also be a time that we could start seeing models getting updated too. One thing that the Horus Heresy has been doing slowly but surely, and I think could also affect us, is just slowly phasing out metal, maybe, just to get us some characters or maybe redone units, stuff that really does need to get updated as time progresses. There is a bunch of units there that are very, very old, let's put it that way. Some of the older kits have aged very, very well. Orc boys, for example, fantastic. But not so much the goblins, not so much certain wood elves and stuff like that. It could be a time now to start seeing that slowly phase in and just benefit everyone altogether. I know a lot of people who want to play Tomb Kings, for example, but don't want to deal with those comical skeletal warriors, which, yeah, really don't look nice. That's the only way that we can explain how they look, right? They just don't look great compared to, say, for example, the Tomb Guard and all the other ones, the kits that were more updated for around 8th edition. Going back to Cathay 1 second, this is the army that I've been painting up. It's clear that Cathay isn't done. What we know from like Total War and also from a little bit of the lore, it's very likely that Cathay is going to need a few full journals just to be able to really get everything out there. Now, I don't think that we're going to get everything in one go. And I think it actually makes a lot of sense that we've only gotten one Cathay journal and the second one's just going to focus around like story, it seems. Because it wouldn't make sense to release one big bulk of Cathay and then very quickly do another bulk. They always take their time. They always take sometimes a year, 2 years. It depends if you look at certain factions within 40k and Age of Sigmar. I think the same could happen here, which admittedly isn't great. It might be a while until we actually get the full Cathay experience, but it's not like this army is cheap by any means. A fair chunk of what you see on screen was gifted to me by Games Workshop, a big thank you to them, but I bought the other 4 Sentinels because I wanted to have one of each. I bought an extra battalion box, I bought 2 balloons and more kits of the Gate Masters. It was a fairly expensive purchase, and people are going ham with the first new army in 20 years, so they're expecting people to go ham and buy a lot of boxes. It wouldn't make sense to release the second wave right now. I could realistically see a second wave of Grand Cathay next year if this is sold very well, but it could also get pushed to a further year back too. Again, the trend for armies has been very, very weird for Games Workshop. Half releases, it just makes no sense, but I guess it just does from a stock point of view. I've seen a fair amount of speculation saying Kislev might be next, which I guess makes sense, you know. Kislev would have likely been designed around the same time as Cathay, more or less. We have seen some blog posts which they said, you know, they designed stuff in tandem. This was recent and also during the development phase of Warhammer 3. So while I think that maybe the Kislev army is fully designed, I don't think it's produced just yet. I think we'll go around the same system where we'll get an Arcane Journal with a half a faction like Cathay, which isn't great, but again, they're playing it safe, and I think they're going to play it safe further. By some definition and technicality, the main settings like Age of Sigmar, 40k, and I think Heresy a little bit, but Heresy's been a bit less because it's a very kind of compact setting. They've been getting sometimes 2, 3 new factions, sometimes it's just splitting up factions and making a whole new one out of that. That's been happening every year and a half, sometimes every full edition. I think that's something that could happen to the old world, but it's later down the line. They're going to play it safe because this is the first edition and they just don't know how well it's going to sell. Sure, they've publicly stated, yes, you know, it's doing better, we've increased the scope, but that was during the launch where everything was really, really hyped up. Now that things are kind of like leveling, they want to see, is it going to be selling a lot? Are we going to be getting a lot here from new factions, new models, redos of models? So if I were to make an educated guess, I'd say we won't see Kislev until 2nd edition, whenever that happens, unless the sales for Cathay have been very, very good. Okay, and now we have to start talking about the legacy factions. Yes, Games Workshop have said that they're not going to get any support, then they did get its support, and now there's been nothing. But I do imagine that we'll start to see them slowly creep in when they're relevant to the story, and when they're being kind of phased out properly in Age of Sigmar. This is something that we could see happening over multiple editions. Right now, when you look at the legacy factions, during this time period, we know nothing about the Lizardmen. The Dark Elves, the Vampire Counts, those ones are more active, and they become more active as time progresses. Skaven are right now breeding up and so on, because they've had that civil war, most of them have been killed off. We know that there's not a lot happening with the Demons of Chaos. The Ogres, I imagine, will get some story, considering the fact that we are getting we have Grand Cathay, so yeah, the Ogres are something that we should be seeing a lot more, especially as we've got some Cathay and Ogres. And the Chaos Dwarves, I imagine, will become relevant. Well, we have some Chaos Dwarves in the game already, thanks to the Hell Cannon, but maybe down the line. So, right now, if I were to make an educated guess, I would say the vampire counts are going to be one of the first ones that we'll see returning. There's a few reasons for that. One, the vampire counts have had their units kind of phased out already. Some new units have already been released, which is the same unit essentially, but with a brand new name. So we don't have Black Knights anymore, we don't have Graveguard, they're called something else in Age of Sigmar, which means that they could be usable back in our setting. It just kind of makes sense, right? The Dark Elves, I don't think have been phased out just yet, but I think it's only a matter of time because the cities of Sigmar are looking more and more human, so they're going to be replacing those eventually, but not as quickly as the vampires. The vampires, if you actually go into the Old World interactive map, there's a number of mentions for the False Grail, which is supposed to be doing something with blood dragons and so on. It's the Fall of Musilon, so I imagine that we'll get like a Arcane Journal called Bretonia, or maybe just first Vampire Count 1, if that's what they want to do, and just bring in a lot of the old missing units. It's a safe bet, and it's less production cost for them to just start redoing or just repackaging a bunch of boxes that haven't sold and go, yep, Vampire Counts, here you go. It's another way of bringing in the vampires because, well, the main one, the Von Carsteins right now, are mostly killed off, and some of them are just in hiding, but this is another way to kind of bring that faction back into the limelight. We also know that there is a Blood Dragon Keep for Wallach Harken in the interactive map. So I do think it's just a matter of time for the legacy factions. I think a lot will depend on what happens with this Border Prince list. If it is a lot of like the old school Dogs of War, so it essentially just becomes a new army, but with old minis, that will kind of define what happens. I guess we're going to have to wait for that. They were announced during the summer preview, so I guess maybe 3-4 months time. It does depend, because sometimes stuff gets announced during preview events, and then nothing happens for a long time. But these are just some theories I have. I wanted to talk about this because, yeah, I do imagine that things are going to slow down, but I feel like stuff is still going to come out. We just have to wait and see. But what do you think is next for the Old World? I've seen some people saying like we might get like a Norska book. I don't know if that's needed, in all honesty. I mean, we have the Walls of the Sea, and that basically covers Norska. I mean, it's missing Ettins and so on, which would be lovely. And maybe some mammoths. I know a lot of people have been wanting the Chaos Mammoths back, or maybe redone in plastic, which would be infinitely better. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of discussion. Have a great day, guys. I do apologize. I haven't been posting a lot lately. I've been sorting out a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of work. Have a great one, guys. See you all again very, very soon.